So today I'm going to draw a line in the sand. That is, I'm going to stop using generative image and video technology in my work. So from now on, my videos will not use any footage that was produced using that technology. Now, I don't see it as wasted effort. I have spent about 3 years making a bunch of videos that contain AI footage that I'm really proud of, and a huge amount of those videos make use of video footage which was generated using services like Runway, Midjourney, and others. And it was an awesome way to realize visually what I've been trying to get across musically since I started 404 in 2009. I really loved the way that I could effectively write my way to achieving visuals by making use of text to image and image to video. It brought to life a series of stories that I would never have been able to do without the technology. Now, it was really like gaining a new sense for me because, so for one thing, I have something called prosopagnosis, which is an inability to see images inside my head. The best I get is kind of a fuzzy awareness of shapes and colors. And so for me, it really unlocked a creative process. And it was an amazing opportunity to get some of the metaphorical landscapes realized for the worlds I was singing about. When I was using technology, I always worked towards original expression in that I was very fastidious about using technology in a creative way. I've always been conscious of the way in which the underlying models for generative images and videos was based on existing content. And I worked very hard to avoid creating derivative works. It very much represented a journey for me of trying to hack out unique or new from what I thought was a fairly sterile base, and it was one that really felt like it only wanted to make generic material. And in that respect, I feel it was fairly successful. And I think that despite the limiting aspects of the technology, I've been able to find my own expression and style using these tools. But at the end of the day, it still felt quite hollow. Despite these wins, it just felt like something was missing. I would feel an absence or an emptiness, no matter how amazing a video or image looked. And I think there's a real difference with the output of generative technology that lacks the genuine human connection that you have when you either produce a work yourself or with others. And when I play music with live people, it doesn't matter to me what technical skill they have. What's important is the energy that they bring to the table. When it comes to a statistical model, there's a completely gaping abyss in this respect. So the question might be, why stop now? Well, we're at a junction where these tools are maturing, they're becoming ubiquitous. We're seeing a world saturated in generative imagery. And day by day, for me at least, it feels increasingly tainted. Whether it's the feeling that there's an injustice being perpetuated on the artists whose work was used to train those models, which I'll come back to because I've got a point I want to address there. But there's the environmental impact of greedy GPUs grinding requests, and there's the feeling of guilt that I have by association, I suppose, with the technology that we're now seeing being used increasingly to undermine democratic institutions, to compress and deaden the human response to visual art through the repetitious exposure to the extreme hyperreality of constant stimulus. And I think to some degree there's a small amount of perhaps self-hatred, or maybe a less strong word, in using technology, which really just makes the creation of these videos so easy. I would never take shortcuts or use generative AI to make my own music. And I think I've reached a stage where it just feels like a real disconnect for me to not maintain those values across all of my creative output. So I want to say I'm not ruling it out in future, but the dynamics would need to change sufficiently. There are some amazing innovations happening in the space. I'm super interested in seeing how the technology will advance. But there needs to be a much more direct relationship between my creative direction and the end result, rather than feeling like I'm piloting a clumsy boat or rolling a 20-sided die. So there's one other issue that I wanted to talk about, and that's that I don't agree that model training on these generative systems is theft. So as a postscript, I really wanted to address that issue because I fundamentally don't believe that using existing content to train models is stealing from artists. Okay, and I think that there's quite a bit of discussion in the community about this. Now, I see it personally as a form of fair use in the legal sense, in terms of the manner in which copyright law serves to provide that balance between being a vehicle to enable the commercialization of ideas, to encourage distribution while protecting creators. And I think this especially is true given that the training process itself effectively destroys the original work in the encoding process. And that's an important point from a technical legal perspective in terms of how copyright works. But that said, yes, it is very possible to create something that looks like a derivative work, which really matches the precise aesthetic of an artist. But I think that our use of these tools should be the yardstick, rather than pushing it back to the training stage, attempting to monetize usage in model training. And that the focus should really be on whether somebody produces highly derivative works, and then protection should be put in play in respect to that output. And the reason is that copyright exists to promote the dissemination of knowledge and the advancement of human capacity. Model training requires vast amounts of data to function, and the usage of specific elements across those data is opaque even to their producers. And so we're seeing some companies, like OpenAI, are currently working on this challenge by trying to transparently track the use of data through the reasoning process of one of their models. But it is literally impossible to perform any form of accurate attribution for any given output. So there's no real easy way to measure how much of what was used of which work. Okay, so I think it's very difficult to really connect and enumerate that connection, and it's probably better to look at the end result and make a reasoned decision with respect to whether that's highly derivative or not, rather than looking at the fact that training occurred on the content. But at any rate, I find that the training as theft narrative is very confusing to me. It seems to be a strange conflation of anti-capitalism with an extreme which is rooted quite deeply in capitalist values, to sort of have your cake and eat it affair, where you've got training denialists protesting with their palms outstretched demanding dollars. Anyway, I can see that generative AI is bringing about massive changes to our human experience. Some of those are beneficial and some are detrimental. We're seeing massive upheaval in workforces. We're seeing major scientific breakthroughs. People are losing cognitive function with over-reliance on these systems, but others are reporting that it's had an augmentative effect. Technology isn't evil in itself, and the corpus of artistic and academic works is humanity's legacy. It's a foundation on which we may achieve the incredible. And I think that ultimately the possibility of doing so should be preserved, but it's up to us to use it responsibly, ethically, and in good faith. Thanks.